Welcome, and let us take a slow and quiet journey into the world of the medieval monastery. Far from the noise of castles, markets, and wars, behind stone walls and wooden gates, monks lived lives shaped by silence, prayer, and labor. Their world was not one of luxury or freedom, but of discipline, humility, and repetition in existence, ruled not by personal desire, but by the ringing of a bell. Imagine yourself stepping into a monastery. The air is cool, carrying the faint scent of damp stone and wax from burning candles. Cloisters stretch around a courtyard, their arches casting long shadows. The only sound is the steady drip of water from a fountain, and far off the echo of footsteps upon flagstones. The walls are bare, the rooms sparse, every detail shaped by simplicity. Here, life follows a strict rhythm, not hours of choice, but hours of duty. At dawn, in darkness, monks gather to pray. At noon, they eat a simple meal. In the afternoon, they labor in fields, workshops, or scriptoria. At night, they sleep in narrow cells, their beds hard, their blankets thin. And always, the bell marks the flow of time calling, summoning, demanding obedience. This is not a life of ease. Hunger lingers, silence weighs heavy, and cold presses against the body in long winters. Yet for the monks, this was not suffering, but devotion, a way to step away from the temptations of the world and closer to the presence of God. Tonight, as we walk through this monastery together, we will feel their rhythm. The long days, the endless prayers, the aching hands copying texts, the rare beauty of chant rising in stone halls. We will see why it was so difficult, why it demanded endurance, and why most of us today would not last a single day in their shoes. In a monastery, time was not measured by clocks or choice, but by the ringing of a bell. The bell was the true master of every monk's life, sounding in deep tones that echoed across cloisters, courtyards, and fields. Each strike carried meaning, each chime summoned obedience. Imagine yourself lying in a narrow cell before dawn. The room is small, no larger than a closet, its walls bare. A straw mattress lies beneath you, thin and uneven, the blanket rough against your skin. Outside, darkness still holds the land, the air cold enough to sting your breath. And then it comes. The bell tolls, a heavy, resonant sound that cuts through silence. At once, the monastery stirs. Doors creak open, footsteps shuffle upon stone floors, and monks move in quiet procession toward the chapel. No one speaks. Words are reserved for prayer. The bell alone speaks for all. Throughout the day, the bell calls again and again. At dawn, for matins and lauds, the long prayers of morning. At mid-morning, for terce. At noon, for sext. In the afternoon, for none. In the evening, for vespers. Prayers sung as the sun dips low. At night, before rest, for compline, the final devotion. 7 times a day, the bell commands, and 7 times the monks obey. Between prayers, the bell calls them to meals, to labor, to study. It sets the rhythm of work in fields, the quiet labor of tending gardens, the endless task of copying manuscripts. It even marks the time for sleep, sending them back to narrow beds until its voice rises once more. There is no ignoring it. To resist the bell is to resist the rule. To resist the rule is to resist the very purpose of monastic life. And so, each monk bends to its command, shaping his life around its tones, surrendering freedom in exchange for order. For us today, accustomed to choice, the life feels unbearable. To wake not when we please, but when commanded. To eat not when hungry, but when the bell decrees. To speak not when thoughts rise, but only when silence allows. The bell is not simply sounded, is authority, a constant reminder that a monk's life is no longer his own. Yet, in that surrender lies the essence of monastic devotion. The bell is steady, unchanging, faithful. Its voice is the same yesterday and today, just as faith was meant to be. For the monks, its toll was not burden, but anchor, a rhythm that carried them from birth to death, from prayer to prayer, from silence into eternity. The first duty of the monk's day began before the sun itself, while the world outside the monastery walls still lay deep in darkness. The bell tolled for matins and lauds the great prayers of the night and early morning. Imagine it. The air is cold, biting at your skin as you leave your narrow cell. The corridor is lit only by dim lanterns, their flames trembling in the draught. Your sandals slap softly against the stone floor as you walk, joining a silent line of brothers moving in unison. No one speaks, no one laughs. Words are not allowed here, save for the words of prayer. The chapel waits ahead, vast and echoing. Its walls rise high, carved of thick stone that holds the chill of the night. Wooden benches line the floor, candles flicker on the altar, their light barely breaking the shadows. Above, the air smells faintly of wax and incense, the lingering traces of countless prayers offered through the years. The monks take their places, the abbot signals, and the prayers begin not in whispers, but in chants, voices rising together in solemn rhythm. The Latin words fill the air, Domini, labia, me, aperies. Lord, open my lips. The chant is steady, unhurried, each note rising and falling like waves. It is not for performance, not for beauty, but for devotion. For hours, the monks chant psalms, read scripture, and recite prayers. Time loses shape in the repetition. Darkness lingers outside, but within the chapel, voices weave together into a river of sound, ancient words flowing endlessly. Imagine the sound echoing from stone walls, drifting upward into rafters, returning faintly like whispers from the past. And when the chanting ends, silence returns. Silence that is not empty, but heavy and unbroken, hush that presses upon the ears. In the monastery, silence was a discipline as much as prayer. Monks were forbidden to chatter, forbidden even to speak casually. Words were rationed, saved for sacred texts and formal necessity. Imagine carrying silence like a cloak, hour after hour. In the fields, you work without conversation, hearing only the wind and the scrape of tools against soil. In the refectory, you eat without laughter, listening instead to a brother reading scripture aloud as you chew your bread. In the dormitory, you rest without whisper, the sound of your own breathing loud in your ears. For us today, silence can feel like peace, but in the monastery, silence was discipline and yielding, constant, and sometimes suffocating. Thoughts echoed louder without the balm of casual speech. Emotions had no outlet except prayer. To live day after day in silence was to wrestle not only with hunger or cold, but with one's own restless mind. And yet, within this silence, monks believed they drew closer to God. Each withheld word was an offering. Each unspoken thought was a sacrifice. In silence, they listened not to one another, but to the whisper of the divine. As dawn finally broke outside, pale light seeping through narrow windows. The monks left the chapel, their prayers complete. They filed once more into the cloisters, their footsteps soft, their mouths closed. The sun was rising, but their day had already been long, and before the day was done, silence would weigh on them still, shaping every breath, every moment, every heartbeat. For the monk, dawn was not the beginning of freedom. It was only the beginning of obedience. In the monastery, food was never about pleasure. It was not prepared to satisfy hunger fully, nor to bring joy to the tongue. It was a necessity, limited, and guided by rules as strict as any prayer. To eat as a monk was to practice discipline, even at the table. Imagine the refectory, the great dining hall of the monastery. The room is long and narrow, its stone walls bare, but for a wooden crucifix at one end. Long benches line both sides of heavy tables, their surfaces worn smooth by decades of use. The floor is swept clean, the air faintly cool, and the only warmth comes from a single fire that burns low at the far end of the hall. The monks file in silently, one by one, robes brushing against stone. They take their seats without a word, hands folded upon the table. At the front, a single lectern waits, where one brother will stand to read aloud, while the others eat. For in a monastery, even meals are not for conversation. The voice of Scripture replaces the chatter of common life. The meal begins with prayer, then the bowls are set out. What do they hold? Little more than necessity. A piece of coarse bread, dark and heavy, made of rye or barley. A ladle of thin vegetable, pottage beans, onions, leeks, boiled into a watery stew. Sometimes lentils or peas thickened the broth, but meat was rare, forbidden except on special feast days. Even then, it was often fish, salted and dry, never enough to feel abundant. Water filled their cups, or weak ale, brewed thin and sour. Wine might appear in small amounts on festivals, but never in excess. The meal was plain, always plain, for the purpose was not to indulge, but to humble the body. As you chew the bread, its crust tough, its taste earthy, you listen to the voice of the reader. He recites from Scripture, from the rule, or from the writings of saints. The words echo in the hall, steady and solemn, filling the silence. The monks eat slowly, carefully, each bite small. Each swallow accompanied not by laughter or talk, but by thought and reflection. Hunger was constant. Portions were small, never enough to fill the belly fully. Fasting was frequent, especially during Lent and other holy seasons, when meals were reduced even further. Some monks practiced personal austerity, choosing to eat even less than what was offered, believing that denying the body brought them closer to God. Imagine working long hours in the fields on such a diet. The body aches, the stomach growls, yet still you labor, swinging tools, carrying wood, digging earth. The food sustains just enough strength to continue, but never enough to bring comfort. And yet, in this simplicity, there was meaning. For the monks, every bite of plain bread was a reminder of humility, every sip of water a symbol of purity. Food was not for delight, but for discipline, not for the body, but for the soul. At the end of the meal, the bowls are cleared. The reader closes his book, and all rise in silence once more. There is no lingering, no second helpings, no conversation. The refectory empties as it filled, quietly, steadily, each monk returning to labor or prayer, the taste of bread and beans still lingering on the tongue. For us today, accustomed to abundance, such meals feel harsh, even cruel. But for the monk, they were part of the vow, another way to bend the body in service of faith. Hunger was not an enemy, but a teacher, and in its lessons they found devotion. When prayers ended and meals were done, the monks turned to another duty just as sacred: labor. To live in a monastery was not only to pray, but also to work with one's hands, to cultivate the earth, and to sustain the community through toil. The rule of Saint Benedict declared, "Idleness is the enemy of the soul." And so, every day, hours of physical labor shaped the rhythm of monastic life. Imagine stepping outside the stone walls into the monastery's fields. The morning air is cool, heavy with mist. Beyond the cloisters, rows of crops stretch into the distance: wheat, barley, beans, and vegetables that sustain the brothers. The soil is dark, damp from last night's rain. Tools rest ready: wooden plows, iron hoes, baskets woven from reeds. The monks work in silence. No words pass between them. You hear only the scrape of hoes against soil, the swish of sickles cutting grain, the steady breathing of men bending and rising in rhythm. Birds sing faintly in the hedgerows. The wind stirs through the fields, but otherwise the land is filled with quiet industry. In spring, the work is planting hands, pressing seeds into earth, rows carefully measured. In summer, it is tending, pulling weeds, watering, mending fences broken by storms. In autumn, it is harvest, the fields alive with motion as stalks of grain are cut and gathered into sheaves. In winter, though the land lies barren, labor continues, cutting wood for fires, repairing barns, caring for animals. The animals themselves are part of this duty. Sheep graze in nearby meadows, their wool shorn each spring for cloth. Cows provide milk, goats offer cheese, bees fill hives with honey, chickens scratch in the dirt for grain. Each creature demands care, and monks rise at dawn to feed, milk, shear, or guide them. And the labor is not only in fields. Some monks tend vineyards, pruning vines with careful hands, waiting months for grapes to ripen into sweetness. Others labor in orchards, climbing ladders to pluck apples and pears, storing them in cool cellars for winter. Still others work in gardens, where herbs grow: sage, thyme, mint, both for flavor and for medicine. The work is hard. Backs ache, hands blister, muscles tire. The sun burns in summer, the wind cuts in winter. Rain soaks the body until robes cling heavy. Yet the monks endure it all, for labor is not a burden, but an offering, a prayer in motion. Every strike of the hoe, every bundle of grain lifted, is done as service not to wealth or ambition, but to God and the community. In the distance, a bell rings, marking the hour. The monks pause, wipe sweat from their brows, and bow their heads in silent prayer. Then, without a word, they return to work, the rhythm beginning again. For us today, such labor feels endless, crushing. To rise each morning not to choice, but to command. To spend hours bent over soil, hands raw, stomach empty, silence unbroken. Few would endure long. Yet, for the monks, this was the rhythm of life itself. Their prayers were in the chapel, but also in the fields. Their devotion was spoken, not only in psalms, but in the earth turned by their hands. When evening came and tools were set aside, the fields bore witness to their labor. Rows of grain swayed in wind, orchards heavy with fruit, flocks resting in pens. The land itself became part of the monastery's devotion, shaped and cared for by the quiet, patient toil of men who asked for nothing but to serve. Not all labor in the monastery took place in the fields. Some of the most important work happened indoors, in a quiet, austere chamber known as the scriptorium, the place where monks copied books by hand. In an age before printing presses, when knowledge could vanish as easily as fire consuming a library, the scriptorium was a lifeline of memory. Here, monks bent over parchment for hours, preserving the wisdom of centuries with ink and patience. Imagine entering the scriptorium on a cold morning. The room is long and narrow, lined with wooden desks. Windows are small and high, letting in only narrow shafts of light. In winter, that light is faint, so candles or oil lamps flicker beside each desk, their smoke curling upward into the air. The room smells of wax, dry parchment, and the sharp tang of ink made from oak galls, iron salts, and vinegar. The silence here is absolute. Each monk sits in stillness, quill in hand, eyes fixed upon the page. The only sounds are the scratch of pen upon vellum, the faint rustle of parchment being turned, and the occasional cough quickly stifled. Hours pass in this rhythm, steady, unbroken, almost meditative. The work is demanding. Letters must be formed precisely, evenly, without error. A single slip of the hand could ruin an entire page, sometimes an entire book. Monks sharpen their quills again and again, dipping them into small inkwells, tracing lines slowly across pale parchment. Each stroke requires concentration, each word an act of devotion. Some monks work as scribes, copying texts line by line. Others serve as illuminators, adding decoration, bright colors, gold leaf, and intricate designs that turn words into art. Imagine a monk dipping his brush into red or blue pigment, carefully painting the first letter of a chapter into a great curling design of vines and beasts. The work could take hours for a single page, days for a single section, years for a single book. The subjects vary. Scripture, above all, the Bible, Psalms, the writings of church fathers, but also ancient texts, works of philosophy, medicine, astronomy that might otherwise have been lost to time. Thanks to these quiet hours in dim rooms, the voices of Aristotle, Galen, and countless others survived the collapse of empires and the silence of centuries. The labor is hard on the body. Fingers ache from gripping the quill. Eyes strain in dim light. Backs bend painfully over desks. In winter, the cold stiffens the hands. The ink thickens and clots. The breath of the scribe fogs in the air. In summer, sweat drips onto parchment. Insects hover at the edge of lamplight. Yet the work continues, line after line, day after day. And for what? Not for fame, not for wealth. The names of most scribes are unknown, their handwriting their only legacy. But for them, anonymity was part of the devotion. To copy a book was not to glorify oneself, but to glorify God, to serve future generations, to preserve knowledge that might otherwise vanish. Imagine holding one of these finished books, its leather binding heavy in your hands, its pages thick, smooth, and cool. Within, the words are neat, steady, and eternal, copied by men whose lives were quiet, but whose impact reached centuries beyond them. Each letter is a prayer, each page an offering, each book a monument built not of stone, but of ink and faith. For us today, surrounded by printed books and endless digital pages, the labor feels unimaginably years of life devoted to writing words already written. But for the monks, it was a sacred duty. In the stillness of the scriptorium, they were not merely writing, they were giving eternity to memory. Behind every prayer, every meal, every moment of labor in a medieval monastery lay a text, the Rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century by Benedict of Nursia. It became the foundation of Western monastic life. To read it today is to see not only laws and instructions, but a vision of a life where the individual disappears into order, where humility and obedience replace freedom. Imagine Benedict himself. Born around the year 480 in Italy, he left behind a world of political chaos and moral decline. The Roman Empire had crumbled, cities fell into disorder, and Benedict sought peace not in society, but in retreat. He lived for years as a hermit in a cave near Subiaco, his days filled with prayer, his nights with solitude. Disciples gathered to him, drawn by his discipline. Out of their community grew the vision of a life ruled not by whim, but by principle. His rule is not long 73 short chapters, but its words shaped centuries. It begins with a simple call to listen. Listen carefully, my child, to the Master's instructions, and attend to them with the ear of your heart. From that first line, obedience flows through every chapter, a steady river of discipline guiding the monk's path. The rule demanded vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Nothing was to be owned individually. All goods were held in common. Sexual desire was renounced, family ties loosened, the self given wholly to the community, and, above all, obedience was absolute to God, to Scripture, to the abbot whose authority was final within the walls. Daily life was ordered to the smallest detail. The hours of prayer were set, 7 times each day and once in the night. Meals were defined. 2 simple meals a day, with meat forbidden except for the sick. Work was mandated for both body and soul, manual labor and sacred reading together, balancing effort with devotion. Silence was required in dormitories, in refectories, in cloisters. Speech was rare, rationed like bread, permitted only where necessary. Even punishment was prescribed. A monk who disobeyed faced penance, fasting, separation, or public confession before the community. For greater sins, exile, or even expulsion. The rule was both guidance and law, shaping not only prayer, but the very posture of daily life. Yet, it was not cruel. Benedict, unlike harsher ascetics, allowed for weakness. He acknowledged that men grow weary, that bodies hunger, that minds falter. His rule sought balance, not too much fasting, not too little work, not unbearable silence, but a middle path of discipline that could be sustained. It was not meant to break men, but to bend them into steady obedience. Imagine yourself as a monk under this rule. You rise not when you wish, but when the bell commands. You eat what is placed before you, never asking for more. You sleep in a narrow cell, your possessions limited to a robe, a belt, and sandals. Every action, from walking to speaking, is shaped by obedience to something greater than yourself. For us today, it feels like suffocation, to surrender choice so completely, to give up not only freedom, but identity. Yet, for the monk, this surrender was the very point. By renouncing the self, he sought to lose his ego and find God. The rule was not punishment, but promise, that through discipline, humility, and endurance, the soul might rise closer to heaven. And so the rule of Saint Benedict endured, copied and carried from one monastery to another, spreading across Europe, binding generations of monks into the same rhythm of prayer, work, and silence. Long after Benedict himself was gone, his rule remained, steady as the toll of a bell, shaping lives in cloisters from Italy to England, from Spain to Germany. It was more than a book. It was the heartbeat of monastic life. The monastery was not only a place of prayer and labor, it was also a vault of memory. Within its thick stone walls, monks preserved texts that might otherwise have vanished forever. And yet, history tells us that many manuscripts were not merely preserved, but also lost, hidden, or destroyed. The story of these manuscripts is one of mystery, fragments of knowledge that flicker into view across centuries before vanishing again. Imagine stepping into a monastery's library, a room cool and dim, its air filled with the smell of wood, parchment, and dust. Some are covered in leather, darkened by time, others in plain wood, their spines unmarked. To hold one of these books is to feel centuries in your hands, thick parchment. Ink faded to brown, letters precise, margins filled with notes written by scribes long gone. And yet many works never survived. Fires consumed them, one spark from a candle, one ember from a hearth, and years of labor turned to ash. Wars ravaged monasteries, soldiers tearing through libraries, manuscripts carried away or burned for fuel. Floods soaked them, rot devoured them, insects ate them page by page. Others vanished in silence. Some manuscripts were locked away in cupboards, forgotten when generations passed. Some were hidden deliberately, sealed behind walls, tucked into crypts, buried with abbots or patrons. Their presence is known only by faint references in letters, whispers of titles no one has seen for centuries. And some carried secrets. In the scriptorium, margins were not always blank. Monks scribbled notes in Latin, Greek, Arabic. They doodled small drawings, symbols, even coded remarks. Some wrote between the lines, so faint the words can only be read today with special light. Hidden text palimpsests were made by scraping old parchment to reuse it. Yet, beneath the visible words, older writings still sleep, waiting to be uncovered. In these layers, we find voices of the ancients, forgotten poems, lost philosophies, fragments of plays that would otherwise be silent forever. One famous example is the Codex Sinaiticus, one of the earliest complete Bibles, hidden for centuries in St. Catherine's Monastery at Sinai. Others include works of Aristotle and Euclid, preserved only because monks copied them with care. Without these fragile pages, much of ancient science, medicine, and philosophy would be unknown today. But the mystery lies not only in what was saved, but in what was lost. Ancient books mentioned by name, great libraries of Rome, treatises of Greek philosophers, dramas of unknown poets were once stored in monasteries, only to disappear without trace. Did fire consume them? Did damp destroy them? Or do they still lie hidden, sealed behind forgotten walls, their secrets waiting in silence? Imagine sitting in a cold scriptorium, candle flickering, a monk copying carefully by hand. He does not know that centuries later, scholars will treasure his words. He does not know that many of his works will vanish, leaving only fragments. And yet, to us, the lost manuscripts whisper of absence. They remind us that history is incomplete, that much of the world once known is gone. But they also remind us of the persistence of memory, that even in silence, some words endure, waiting to be rediscovered. The monastery was not just a place of stone and prayer. It was a labyrinth of texts, some still with us, others gone, all bound together by mystery. And in that mystery lies part of their power, that we can imagine the pages still resting somewhere in the dark, words waiting patiently to be read once more. Within the monastery walls, monks lived under vows of poverty, silence, and obedience. Their cells were bare, their meals sparse, their days filled with labor and prayer. Yet not every man in the church lived so simply. Above the ordinary monk stood figures of immense influence: the abbot, ruler of the monastery, and the bishop, guardian of entire dioceses. Their lives revealed a sharp contrast between humble devotion and worldly power. Imagine the abbot's chamber, while the average monk slept in a narrow cell with straw bedding. The abbot's quarters were larger, with a wooden bed, a desk for writing, and shelves lined with books. A small fire might burn in the hearth during winter, its smoke curling lazily upward, warming the stone. His meals, though not luxurious, were more abundant, for he dined with guests, officials, and sometimes nobles. The abbot held authority not only over spiritual life, but over practical matters as well. He oversaw land, fields, and tenants, managing wealth that sustained the monastery. He directed the work of monks, disciplined the disobedient, and negotiated with kings, lords, and merchants. His word was law within the cloister. To a humble monk, the abbot's authority was unquestionable, his commands were as binding as the tolling of the bell. Beyond the monastery, bishops wielded even greater influence. Their cathedrals rose high above towns, towers visible for miles. Within, light poured through stained glass, illuminating floors of polished stone. Bishops wore robes of silk and gold, rings gleaming upon their fingers, croziers of silver in their hands. They presided over councils, blessed kings, and advised rulers. In a world of feudal power, the bishop's voice carried weight equal to a noble's sword. Their wealth was vast. Lands donated by patrons enriched cathedrals and abbeys. Tithes poured in from peasants who gave a share of their harvest. Gifts from kings-filled treasuries jeweled chalices, embroidered vestments, golden crosses. The church grew rich, while common people struggled with hunger. For the ordinary monk, this contrast was clear, but rarely questioned. His vow was obedience. His role, humility. He tilled soil, copied books, prayed in silence, while abbots dined with nobles, and bishops traveled in carriages surrounded by guards. The monk gave up all possessions, yet the church owned lands wider than kingdoms, and yet even abbots and bishops bore their own burdens. An abbot carried the weight of leadership, every decision his to make. He was expected to balance discipline with compassion, justice with mercy. A bishop was judged not only by the church, but by kings, nobles, and people. His life was a constant negotiation between faith and politics, between devotion and power. Still, the contrast remained striking. In the fields, a monk bent low, hands caked with soil, stomach gnawing with hunger. In the cathedral, a bishop raised his hand in blessing, jewels glittering in candlelight, choirs singing behind him. Two faces of the same faith, one marked by poverty, the other by splendor. This contrast shaped medieval Christianity. On the one hand, the quiet devotion of monks preserved knowledge, tilled soil, and prayed for the world. On the other, the grandeur of abbots and bishops displayed the church's might, influencing kings, shaping nations, commanding armies. The monks endured silence, hunger, and cold. The abbots and bishops carried wealth, authority, and power. Together, they formed the fabric of the medieval church, a fabric woven of humility and ambition, simplicity and grandeur, poverty and privilege. And in that fabric lay both strength and contradiction. A religion of the poor, guided by men who often lived like princes. Though the life of a medieval monk was marked by hunger, silence, and labor, it was not without moments of beauty. Scattered across the seasons came festivals, rituals, and music, when the quiet halls of the monastery filled with sound, light, and color. These occasions broke the monotony of daily toil and reminded the brothers of the greater rhythm of the sacred year. Imagine the monastery on the eve of a great feast, perhaps Easter or Christmas. For weeks, the monks had lived on meager meals and cold days of labor. Now, the atmosphere shifts. The cloisters are swept clean, candles gathered in greater number, vestments of brighter colors brought out from storage. In the chapel, the altar is dressed with embroidered cloth, chalices polished until they shine. The faint scent of incense lingers in the air, resinous and sweet. At night, when the bell tolls, the monks gather for worship, but this time the silence is broken by music, Gregorian chant, rising in solemn waves, voices joining in unison. The sound is steady, neither rushed nor ornate, yet profoundly moving. Each note lingers in the stone, echoing until it blends with the next, a river of harmony flowing through the hall. The chants are not meant to dazzle, but to lift the spirit, to draw the heart upward in stillness. During great festivals, the ritual grows more elaborate. The abbot leads processions, carrying relics, perhaps the bone of a saint, encased in gold, shimmering in candlelight. Monks file behind, holding candles, their flames swaying gently with each step. Hymns echo, Latin words filling the space with reverence. Outside, villagers sometimes gather, watching the monks pass in solemn silence, their own faith rekindled by the pageantry. On feast days, the refectory table also changes. Where once only beans and bread were served, fish, cheese, and fruit now appear. A cup of wine may be shared, sweet and rare. Portions are larger, bellies filled at last, laughter threatening to break the usual silence. Even here, scripture is read, but the mood is lighter, the hunger less sharp. Beyond festivals, the monastery pulsed with daily ritual that carried its own beauty. Each hour of prayer matins, lauds, vespers was a rhythm of music and silence. The chants, sung in the deep resonance of stone halls, gave shape to time itself. Imagine standing in the cloister as the sun sets, hearing the evening hymn drift through open windows, slow, solemn, filled with peace. In some monasteries, music grew richer still. Choirs developed harmonies, polyphony two or more voices intertwining in intricate patterns. Instruments rarely entered, for the human voice was considered purest, but the chants themselves evolved into melodies that still survive today, echoes of centuries-old devotion. Ritual extended beyond sound. The lighting of candles in darkness, the raising of incense that curled like smoke toward heaven, the bowing and kneeling in unison all created a choreography of faith. The body, the senses, the soul all were engaged, turning even repetition into sacred drama. To the monks, these rituals were not performance. They were participation in something eternal, timeless. Each feast connected them to saints long gone, each chant to angels imagined as singing in heaven. The monotony of daily life dissolved, if only briefly, into moments of transcendence. For us today, those voices still reach across centuries, To hear Gregorian chant is to hear the echo of monks in stone halls singing softly by candlelight. To see illuminated manuscripts is to glimpse the colors of festivals painted onto pages. Their rituals, their music, their celebrations, they were small lights in lives otherwise marked by discipline and struggle. And for the monks themselves, these moments of beauty were not escape, but sustenance. A song in the night, the hunger and the weight of obedience that filled every other day. The life of a medieval monk was one of hardship. Silence pressed on the tongue, hunger gnawed at the body, labor bent the back, and obedience bound every choice. Few of us today could endure it for even a single day. And yet, from that quiet world came a legacy that still shapes us centuries later. The monks preserved knowledge. In their cold scriptoria, by flickering candlelight, they copied the words of Scripture, the wisdom of ancient philosophers, the lessons of medicine, the patterns of the stars. Without their patience, much of the learning of Greece and Rome might have been lost forever. Every book that survives from those times bears their fingerprints, their hours of labor, their devotion to words. The monks preserved music. Their chants, sung in stone halls, became the foundation of Western musical tradition. Even now, Gregorian chant calms the heart, echoing with the same slow rhythm that once carried weary brothers into prayer. The monks preserved the land. They tilled fields, tended orchards, built mills, and kept bees. They turned wilderness into farmland, left villages with food, and gave shape to landscapes that still bear traces of their care. The monks preserved the spirit. Through fasting and feasting, silence and song, they sought to live in harmony with something greater than themselves. Their discipline may feel harsh, but in it lay a steady devotion of faith that the simplest act, done with humility, could echo into eternity. And beyond preservation, they endured. Wars raged outside monastery walls, kingdoms rose and fell, famine swept through villages, yet the monks remained. Their bells tolled through the centuries, their prayers whispered in times of peace and times of chaos alike. While the world shifted, their rhythm remained steady as the rising sun. Today, many monasteries stand in ruins, cloisters broken, scriptoria empty, refectories silent. Yet their influence lingers still in the books we read, the music we hear, the very idea of education, of community, of devotion through discipline. Their legacy is not gone. It lives quietly, like the echo of a bell across time. And now, as we leave the monastery, imagine walking slowly through the cloister one last time. The stone arches rise above you, shadows stretching long across the courtyard. A fountain murmurs softly, its water glinting in the fading light. Beyond, the chapel doors stand closed, their wood dark with age, their silence deep. The day has ended. The bell has rung for Compline, the final prayer of the night. The monks have gathered in the chapel, their voices rising in quiet chant. Soon they will retire to their narrow cells, cloaks wrapped tight, lying upon straw beds, their bodies weary, their minds still, their lips resting in silence. The monastery sleeps, the fields lie quiet, the scriptorium dark, the refectory empty. Candles flicker low, then fade, leaving only the glow of stars above. The rhythm of prayer and labor pauses, waiting for dawn, when the bell will toll again. As you listen, imagine that stillness surrounding you, the silence of the cloister, the soft echo of chant fading into night, the peace of stone walls that have endured for centuries. Let that rhythm ease your own breath, slow your thoughts, and carry you gently into rest. The monks endured a life of discipline, silence, and devotion. You need not endure it. You may rest, here and now, in warmth and comfort. Let their story fade into quiet. Let their bells toll softly in memory. And let sleep come as surely as dawn follows night. Close your eyes. The monastery fades into mist. The chant lingers faintly, then disappears. Only silence remains. And in that silence, rest.